Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Katie Weaver Show. This is Katie. I'm your host, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm still adjusting a little bit to our recent change. So, we're no longer streaming through 1 2 Radio. We're just streaming our shows here on YouTube and mine also on Facebook. I feel like the intro that I've been giving for the last 15 years is, well, irrelevant. So I'm trying to not say those things. I will say this though, we are over in the 1 2 Radio chat room. I'll remain over there. So if you want to chat there, you can by going to 12radio.com, clicking on the chat button, and you'll be redirected into the chat. However, obviously, this event is being live streamed, and that's mostly where it's at. And you can just find that by going to YouTube or Facebook and look for Katie Weaver Domestic Mystic. And you would have had to have done that to be here right now. But that's what's going on. And regardless of whether you are chatting in Facebook or YouTube, the program that I use gives me access to both. So either way, I've got you covered. I can see you. So thank you for being here. I hope you guys had a good 4th if you celebrate, and that you've had a good weekend in general. Oh, we did. We went out on the desert to go camping. And the place that we go is some land that's owned by my brother-in-law's uncle, some family land, and it's beautiful. There's a lot of gorgeous stuff out there, and it's hard to say that the desert is a beautiful place because the desert is a very raw place. The desert is a rough place. The desert is a mostly untouched place. And there's just not very many untouched places in the world these days, as you know. And so to be able to go to places that are that wild really does something for my heart. I love it. That's where I want to be. And so there's beauty in that to me. I know some people think the desert is just ugly, maybe, you know, not that exciting. And maybe it's not to some people. One of the coolest things that we saw on this trip is that the cactuses were blooming. And these cactuses, we call them Annie cactuses because my mom had one that she had dug off of this desert a long time ago that she had on her patio that had just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. And when she passed, my Aunt Sue took it home and it continues to grow and to flower once a year. And that's what makes them so special. The Annie cactuses only bloom once a year. So when you get to see those blooms, that's a privilege because you're only going to see it once. And every year she sends us pictures when the Annie cactus blooms. And a couple of years ago, she gave me a framed picture of it blooming for Christmas and gave us each a start from babies that the Annie cactus had thrown. Unfortunately, I think all 3 of ours died, but Sue keeps it going, so props to her. So this is what we usually see on the Annie cactus. Those are pictures that came from this weekend. They're usually yellow. But this time we also discovered these gorgeous pink and peach ones. I've never seen that before. Look how pretty they are. Yeah, that was exciting. That was very cool to see. But we also had neighbors, and they were horses. The paddock right next to us had 3 horses in it. This one is the smaller one. We figured she was maybe a yearling, maybe a 2 yearling. But they were super friendly, and we had to pass through the pasture to get to the creek. And anytime we did, these 3 would just come hoofing it over there to say hello. Scott had a horse brush in his truck that he uses to brush the pigs. And so he got that out, and they let him brush them down every day. They fought for it. They were also trying to bite, but that's horses. But anyway, that was a really cool experience. We named them. if you know me, I name everything. But we named them Calliope, Clara, and Candace. This is Candace right here. Anyway, that was super cool. And then our last morning, we had a very interesting visitor. This guy right here. Rhonda, right after she got up, she went out in front of their fifth wheel or their motorhome and moved her chair. And this little dude came flying out of it and landed on the side of their motorhome. And Christy was able to get a picture of him. I don't see that very often around here either, at least not up close and personal. So anyway, we had a good time. I also had to be brave as hell. I had to drive the pickup that pulled the trailer with our side by side on it. And I don't normally pull anything. I'm not sure. Well, I know I pulled our camper a couple of times and it was terrifying a long time ago. So I was a little afraid of that, but actually it was fine. It was absolutely fine. I can do hard things. God damn it. Anyway, it was fun. We had a great weekend and it's nice. Scott and I took a night ride in the side by side out and the desert at night is just magic. We were hearing coyotes howling. We nearly ran into a deer. Yikes. Uh, Later the next morning, we saw a herd of antelope come through. We saw jackrabbits. We saw golden eagles. It was just a cool trip. So, oh, we also drove out to a hot springs that we used to go to. Our dad used to take us to when we were little girls, and that was really fun too. So, anyway, all in all, we had a great weekend and a good fourth hiding out, which is good because the dogs don't love the fireworks, and frankly, I don't either. But holy Lord, yesterday a huge fire sprung up out on the west side of town, about 6 miles from me, 8 miles. And I, at last look, it had claimed 1,300 acres and was 0% contained. Last night, they actually evacuated a bunch of people's homes and farms because it looked like it might go that direction, but then it kind of turned. So they still don't have it contained, but it at least isn't currently threatening anybody's property uh, or their livestock or anything. Well, maybe livestock. There could be cows out there on the desert, I guess. But anyway, so yeah, that's a little wild. Don't like seeing that, especially this early. And last night, we've had like a million emergency notifications on our phones, on social media, from the news, everywhere about this fire. And all around me, people are setting off fireworks. Like, how selfish can you possibly be to continue with this shit? I just truly don't understand it. Uh, People's freedom to shoot off fireworks eclipses our freedom to not have, the state burned down. I mean, on that note, people's right to do fireworks eclipses people's right to not have their own home burned down from someone's errant firework. I just do not get this. I'm never gonna. So that's kind of wild, but hopefully that they get that fire underhand soon. We had one several years ago, maybe 10 years ago, that claimed something like 30,000 acres. It was big. And I'm a little worried that this may turn into something like that because we are so dry. Just so, so dry. So anyway, yeah. Hopefully that doesn't happen and they're able to keep it controlled. We noticed last night that the tankers were coming to a fire hydrant on the corner, just around the corner from our house, that they were filling up. It's pretty scary. Crazy stuff. Right, Jane, not to mention just traumatizing to nature and to pets. Absolutely. I know I bitch about this every year. I'm sorry about it. I probably never won't. But here we are. Alrighty. Well, I have what I think is a really interesting topic. Our first night when we rolled into camp, as we were rolling down the road into camp, those are dirt roads and you're going fairly slow. And I had my window down and I realized I was smelling mushrooms. You know, that kind of dark, earthy scent. I was smelling it and I was like, oh God, all these pastures out here are probably full of mushrooms, all kinds of mushrooms, probably. And we've had rain. Last week we had quite a bit of rain early in the week. That's why we got to see the blooms on the cactuses that you just practically never see. But at any rate, smelling all these mushrooms, and I was so curious. We didn't make it back to see them or to find them because they were all in fenced in pastures that they're not really, they're BLM land that people run their cattle on. They lease it and run their cattle on, but still, people don't really appreciate you hopping their fences, you know? So we weren't really able to go out and do much of the searching, but you could smell them. And then we noticed that every night you could smell them, especially when we were out on the side by side in certain areas, you could really smell them. And I was thinking about how interesting that is and about how those mushrooms likely would be gone in one day. In the heat, especially on the desert, they crop up and within a day they're leather. And so, like, obviously the cows would probably still eat them, the deer, the antelope, but we probably wouldn't. And the life cycle of mushrooms was bouncing around in my head because mushrooms have an enormous network under the earth. The mycelium is the little thready stuff that connects them. Is it musty or nutty? Ours are the ones I was smelling are kind of earthy and musty, maybe a little musty. Yeah, it's more of an earthy scent to me, but I know we all smell things differently. When you when you look at the, let me double check my sound. No, I think I'm good, Liliane. Hopefully, I'll try to speak up. I'm a little bit, excuse me, I'm coughing and a little sinusy because of that fire. We're pretty smoky. Anyway, when you look at the mycelium and the underground network that connects mushrooms, it is amazing. Amazing. It can stretch for miles in every direction and weave through roots and rocks or under and around rocks and other mycelium networks of other mushrooms. That's what it looks like under the earth. The connection is unbelievable. So you could pick a mushroom in one place and many miles away from that, pick another mushroom that is from the same mycelium network. It's pretty interesting. It's much larger than we imagine. It is much larger than the connection root set series is sometimes that we see with trees. Nothing really does this better than mushrooms do. Pretty interesting. It also means that in theory, when an animal dies and their body starts to break down into the earth, that feeds the mycelium, that feeds the network. So in theory, a deer could die in one place and a mushroom that was fed by the body of that deer could crop up miles and miles away. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah. Lillian said she's sauteed mushrooms and onions mixed into rice. Nice. We cook mushrooms a lot around here. We like to mushroom in the spring, especially, and throughout the year. So the spring mushrooms are the morels, and then around this time we start to see the chanterelles, and we get portobellas in our backyard and just in general places. We get oyster mushrooms that run up trees of course, and then the puffballs. And sometimes you'll see puffballs that are like basketball sized or bigger. It's crazy. I'm not a big fan of puffballs. They just don't taste like anything. I don't really like them. Maybe we need to try making them a different way, but I haven't been that impressed with them. But I like the rest of them. But yeah, we have quite a few different. We also do have some scary mushrooms here. We have the mushroom that literally looks like a brain, and it is poisonous as hell. You have to be careful. I've been lucky because I have a good friend who is she was a mushroom, like a state registered mushroomer at one time. She and her fiance would go up into the mountains and pick mushrooms all week and then sell them at the farmer's market. And you can only do that with a specific permit that proves that you know what the hell you're talking about, you know, so that you don't do the poisonings. And, at any rate, so she is really good. I can always text her with a mushroom and ask her if it, would kill me or not. Also, the internet and books. Scott has several field guides. So, but yeah, mushrooming is a hobby of ours. It has been for a lot of years. And now that our side by side is up and running, we're going to really be able to get up into the mountains better, up into the spots we want to go to for more mushrooming adventures. So exciting stuff. But I promise we'll be careful. And if we don't know, we'll ask Tina. Jane said, all of a sudden, not feeling so bad about selling my 91 Civic that grew mushrooms after the rain. It was just a part of the circle of life, Jane. JR said, it's been a while. It has been a while, JR. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Ah, speaking of the circle of life, oh my God. Scott started gathering skulls while we were out there. Again, desert, desolate, and not a lot of predators. There's coyotes out there, but yeah, and predatory birds, but or that's kind of it. There's not a lot of any other predation. So he was finding like whole carcasses, like bone sets, and he brought home well, four skulls. He could have brought five, but the one was kind of nasty. But we found a full deer carcass, three cows, two full carcasses, and one that was just the skull, and an elk, a cow elk. So he brought four of them home. If you're wondering why, it's because our nephew Stone is getting married in the fall, and they are doing kind of not really a Halloween theme, but more of like a gothic theme. And she had showed us some ideas for the wedding and for the decor that all included skulls. And we're going to make ceramic ones. We have some great molds for that. But he also gathered some actual skulls. I suspect we'll be spending more time out on the desert gathering skulls before this is done. But yeah, a lot of that. The deer was an upsetting death. I won't tell you about it. You don't have to have that in your mind. But I just kept having to remind myself, like, this is the circle of life out here. That's why there's so many mushrooms and all the cow shit. There's there's that too. But let's get into it. Okay. So this edition of Luminous and of this show is called Hidden Kingdom: Mushrooms in Myth, Magic, and Spirituality. Because as you can imagine, in looking for the mushroom lore in spirituality, I found a lot of it. I don't noted here in the beginning of the article uh, mushrooms on the desert, but also recently on the place we like to walk the most. It's a local nature park that has three ponds and tons of trees and really great walking paths that are paved, which because I walk with my chair, that makes all the difference for me. So we like to walk there. We try to walk there several times a week. And earlier this spring we were walking, and I would never say I have a super nose. I don't. But man, I can smell mushrooms. And I picked up on a mushroom scent, and I stood there and said, "There's mushrooms over in this area." So Scott climbed down off the path into the trees and discovered a tree where there was a big stand of mushrooms grow or of oyster mushrooms growing up, and they were in great shape. So we took them home and we ate them. They were great. All right, so let's talk about it. So, for most of human history, we looked at fungi like plants, right? They grow from the ground. They don't move around. I mean, they seem to be a plant, right? But they're actually not. They are completely different from your run of the mill plant. They have their own biological kingdom that's separate from plants and animals. They actually share more in common with us than they do trees biologically. Again, like we just talked about, mushrooms are the fruit of the mushroom, which is the reproductive organ. That's right. That's what you eat. Mushrooms, reproductive organs. I didn't want to make a nasty joke, but here it is. Yes, I did. Anyway, there are some mushrooms that really look like penises too, so that's kind of funny. But anyway, that is the reproductive organ, that the fruit of the tree. But anyway, because we know there is the mycelium that's under the earth that's doing the hard work. It's known as, in scientific networks or circles, it's been called the Wood Wide Web, instead of the World Wide Web. I kind of like that. So, because of mycelium, trees can share nutrients with one another, which is pretty interesting. Lots of messages are being sent through the mycelium. All of the nutrients, nutrition that's being sent, but that's its own form of biological messaging. I was thinking about that in the scope of us, that however alone you think you are, or however alone you think you have been, we are all standing on our own social mycelium. Now, you may be the only one poking through the earth right now in your world. However, there is an entire network of people that have been a part of your journey. They may still be, they may not still be, but we share so many connections. We are so deeply connected to others in so many unseen ways, or ways that you may never think about. A little like mycelium. So let's talk about some ancient cultures. So mushrooms in ancient Europe. You probably are very familiar, I hope you are, with fairy rings. Fairy ring mushrooms literally grow in a circle. I should have gotten a picture. I'm going to grab you one real quick. We get them all the time, but I don't know if you guys do. But fairy rings literally grow in a circle, and it just has to do with the mycelium. Uh, but it's pretty cool to see. And in ancient Europe, it was believed that fairy rings were a doorway to the fairy realm, to the fae. And there were lots of warnings about not stepping into a fairy ring, and warnings to visitors about staying out of the fairy ring, and children. Like, you don't go in the fairy ring because that's how the fairies get you. That's how you end up having a one wild night with the fairies that turned out was 100 years on the human side and stuff like that. That's what a fairy ring looks like. That's a picture from Wyoming. But yeah, fairy rings are pretty interesting. But that was a big piece of lore back in the days of the Fae. So, according to Celtic lore, that's where the veil had grown especially thin. Again, it was portals into the realm of the Fae. You stayed out of those. You also didn't mess with them. You didn't harvest those mushrooms. You didn't disturb those in any way that risked bad luck, illness, or becoming lost. Even livestock, a lot of times, were moved away from a spot where a fairy ring had popped up until it was gone. When children were warned to stay away from them. Pretty interesting. Now, in Norse tradition, I had never heard this. I think this is so interesting. The berserkers. So, Norse warriors had what was called the berserkers, and they were Viking warriors that were said to be almost supernatural. They seemed to not feel pain or fear. They would continue to fight until they didn't have limbs left, literally. That's how little fear or pain they were feeling and how much energy they had. So there's been a lot of conversation, and they were extremely dangerous, partly because they would also kill each other or their own people. They really had to be pointed in the right direction at the enemy because there wasn't a lot of discretion between fighting others or fighting their own. So there has been a lot of talk from historians that they may have been consuming uh, the red and white fly agaric mushroom. You know, the one that you see all the time in folklore and stuff, and in a lot of art has depicted the red and white one. In fact, it's on my cover today because it's such a cool mushroom. But they that was something that was pretty normal at one point to use things like that, and some people still do, right? Mushrooms have been used as hallucinogenics across the globe. But at any rate, there is a belief that they may have been using the red and white fly agaric mushroom before battle, that perhaps it was cooked into a stew or a tea or something like that, that may have been that, or maybe even a combo of mushrooms that included that could have been fueling the berserker's trance-like state. So some scholars say that they don't think there's enough evidence to say that's true, but it is a theory that's pretty interesting. How about the shamans of Siberia? The indigenous people in Siberia also had the Amanita muscaria, which is the fly agaric. And there's a lot of stories from their healers, storytellers, spiritual guides, and intermediaries about using the fly agaric mushroom to communicate with the other side or between worlds. It was used in ceremony. They didn't use mushrooms to get fucked up for fun. That wasn't a thing, right? It wasn't really, at least that's what they claim, that it wasn't recreational drug use. This was all ceremonial. It was supposed to, there was a lot of preparation for using it and reverence around it and a clear spiritual purpose. So it wasn't just like you'd wake up one day and decide you were doing it. There were big reasons behind it. So shamans that were using the agaric had described journeys into unseen realms where they sought wisdom, answers to illness, guidance for their communities, or messages from ancestors and healing spirits. So, for example, if there was impending war or they were having trouble with finding food or there was some other kind of dispute in the community, a shaman might prepare for and do a mushroom ceremony in order to get the answers that they needed. So, one of the greatest pieces here is the connection to reindeer, because reindeer have been known to eat fly agaric mushrooms and then act super weird afterwards. Is this flying reindeer? Or was it the people eating the mushrooms with the reindeer? It's an interesting thought. Maybe if you eat the fly agaric, the reindeers fly? There is some talk that perhaps this has influenced the elements of the modern Santa Claus legend. We don't know, but it's pretty interesting stuff. How about Mexico? The Aztec referred to certain mushrooms as the flesh of the gods. I don't know how to say it. I These words absolutely kill me, but teonanactyl or something like that, but is translated as the flesh of the gods. That tells us how they were revered, the flesh of the gods. They also were used for carefully guided ceremonies by spiritual leaders and healers, prayer, chanting, music, and community that had to do with the experience. This wasn't for entertainment, it was for healing, insight, reconciliation, and communion with the sacred. People that were doing it were seeking guidance for illness, difficult decisions, grief, and spiritual growth. So if you had a need, essentially, you could be included in a ceremony with other people that also maybe had a need in order to partake of the mushrooms to get your answers. People still in the New Age community, you'll hear about people that are using peyote here in the North America as well, or as particularly. Um, I've never used peyote. I know people that have. My thoughts on peyote are if you were to do something like that, you should have people around you that are staying sober, that can take care of you and keep an eye on you. You should do it with some very clear goals in mind. And you should only do it rarely, maybe just once. The problem with using psychedelic mushrooms too often is that A, people lose hold of reality. B, they lose hold of their own intuition and spirituality because you become dependent on having to go into some kind of psychedelic trance in order to connect with your intuition, or at least you might develop a belief that that's true. And C, it can cause permanent psychosis in some people, particularly if you're on any kind of psych medication. So if you hear of people in the New Age community using peyote and you're curious about it, think long and hard about it. I'm not saying don't do it. Like I said, I know people that have done it, that do it, that have done super well with it. Some people microdose it for pain too. There's mushroom clinics that have popped up in states where it's legal. It's not legal in mine, but in states where it's legal, in microdoses to help treat chronic pain, which is amazing. So more power to you. But just know that if you're going to use peyote for spiritual purposes, do some serious preparing and planning. Don't just throw yourself into that one day. Really know what you're doing and give yourself a good 24 hours to burn that off because you'll need that. But treat it with the utmost in reverence and respect and do it correctly. And if you take a psych med of any kind, that means anything for depression, anything for anxiety, anything like Wellbutrin to help you stop smoking, any other kind of psych med, a mood stabilizer, anything. Peyote is not for you. Just don't do it. People literally have ended up in psych hospitals from stuff like this, from misusing them. So be super careful and smart. How about ancient Egypt and the promise of immortality? Egypt is interesting because we know that they used mushrooms. We don't know a lot about what they did with them or why. We know that they were reserved for, or well, there's theories that suggest that they were reserved for royalty because they were believed to possess heavenly qualities. There is quite a bit of mushroom iconography in Egypt, but it is a topic that hasn't received a whole lot of deeper dives or deeper investigating, and just not a lot known. We know that they used them though, because they're in their iconography. China. Mushrooms have been big in China. China has given them centuries of respect. For 2,000 years, traditional Chinese medicine has valued medicinal mushrooms. Whenever you see Chinese supplements or you see a Chinese doctor or a Chinese medicine, a doctor that specializes in Chinese medicine, they are probably going to give you mushrooms. The one that stands above the rest is reishi. However, lion's mane is another big one. But reishi has been called the mushroom of immortality. It's a symbol of long life, inner peace, balance, and spiritual cultivation. So there's ancient Chinese paintings depicting sages carrying reishi as they wander through the mountains in search of enlightenment. Pretty interesting. Now, you can buy mushroom coffee. It will always be full of reishi or mushroom supplements, and reishi will be probably the first on the list, along with other mushrooms. But even now, and probably more than ever actually, mushrooms for medicine have become more popular. Scott drank mushroom coffee for a while, the Rise brand. I couldn't stomach it. It just tasted and felt like drinking dirt, and maybe it didn't. Maybe I'm just weird and I just had a weird thing to it, but I couldn't do it. Japan and the spirits of the forest. So Japan believed, through the traditions of Shinto, that rather than separating sacred from everyday life, Shinto teaches that the divine can be found through nature. Ancient trees, waterfalls, mountains, rivers, and forests are all home to kami, the spiritual presences that inhabit the world around us. That's the Japanese belief. And mushrooms really fall into that because they're a part of an old growth forest. They are a part of nature. They're a part of Shinto. In Slavic folklore, there's tons of mushroom legends, but there's a belief that mushrooms grow where ancestral spirits have passed by. So if you find one in the forest, it could be interpreted as a blessing, a greeting from a loved one who's gone before, or a reminder that we're not alone. I love that. The belief that if you walk through the forest and you come across a mushroom, it's there for you. That'll probably feed the bear that comes along later, but you know, it's a message for you too. I kind of love that. There's other Slavic stories that suggest that mushrooms marked places where the forests, good Lord, I'll try again, forest spirits lingered. So the story differs, but basically the idea is that those spirits might be there for protection or guidance or even a warning. Not nefarious, though. I couldn't find anything that made me think that the idea of seeing a mushroom was meant to be scary or a warning, so much as it was, well, maybe a warning that you've gotten too far from the path, a heads up, but not ominous. So how about mushrooms in witchcraft and folklore or folk magic? I mean, how often do you see an image that has to do with witchcraft or folk magic that has some kind of a mushroom included? All the time. Mushrooms have gotten to be extremely popular that way. It makes me laugh. Christy would not eat a mushroom to save her life. She hates them. But she takes mushroom supplements and she absolutely loves mushroom decor. Makes me laugh. Okay, Jane says it does taste like dirt. Confirmed. Okay. Honestly, if it was a broth that wasn't meant to be sweet, I'd probably like it more. I think maybe it's the trying to take something that should be savory in my mind and make it sweet that I don't like. I don't know. So, at any rate, mushrooms and witchcraft. You see them everywhere on altar cloths, oracle decks, artwork, candles, jewelry, tons of jewelry, clothing, and there is some whimsy around mushrooms for sure, especially like the fly agarics. Think of the Smurfs. However, mushrooms have been associated for centuries with mysteries of the earth. They appear so suddenly and disappear just as quickly. You can search for mushrooms in one specific spot and find nothing, and tomorrow be flush. It's how mushrooms grow. They come up quick and they disappear quick. That's what they do. So in folklore, they were also thought to mark places where the veil between worlds was especially thin. The idea behind it really has to do, it really goes back to the old English fae beliefs as well, but and also the belief that spirits had passed nearby, or that mushrooms were marking sacred places where magic naturally gathered. They'd been connected to thresholds between worlds. A lot of people will put mushroom imagery on their altars to represent resilience, renewal, and quiet personal growth. I think that's pretty interesting. So, what if you wanted to practice a little practical mushroom magic? Mushrooms are just kind of magical all in themselves. You don't have to go forage them though, unless you want to. But obviously, if you do, you have to be so super safe and careful. And if you don't know what you're doing or have somebody with you that knows what they're doing, you should be very, very careful with foraging mushrooms. I can't say that loud enough. There have been two cases in Australia in the past couple of years. The first one was unfortunately on purpose. This lady was a pro mushroomer and gathered a bunch of death cap mushrooms and cooked it into a beef Wellington and served it to her soon to be ex husband and his family and killed several of them. Yeah, they are that dangerous. And then more recently on Australia, a man who nearly died from mushroom poisoning because he just didn't know what he was doing and was picking mushrooms and eating them. So, it does happen. They are that dangerous where they can be. But there are mushrooms everywhere. First of all, you can buy about anything you can think of. Have you ever been to an Asian grocery store? There's every mushroom in there you could think of and way more. That's an amazing experience. Have you ever been to an H Mart? Oh my God. H Marts are these giant Asian grocery stores that have so many different foods and things. It's just amazing. The first time we went in an H Mart, we spent like 4 hours. Not really, probably 2 hours. We were there a long time. But the mushroom display was huge. It was like half the produce department. There were mushrooms in there that I've never seen before or even knew existed. It was really cool. But anyway, you can get them. And oh, you guys have one now? Yeah, the fish smell is intense in there. Yeah, I agree with that. That's like going to a Peak Market in Seattle. Have you ever done that? Ooh, the fish smell in there will just about kill you. But anyhow, uh, you can also just buy all kinds of mushroom iconography or look stuff up. In other words, you don't have to go pick mushrooms to benefit from them. However, if you are connecting to mushrooms for your own mushroom magic, sit with mushrooms and think about their colors and their shapes. Everything that's happening beneath the soil, really imagine that mycelium and what it must look like under there and how far it must spread. If you're a journaler, use the prompt, what is quietly growing in my life right now, under the surface? What's your mycelium? There's a beautiful meditation in imagining your own mycelial network and all the people that have supported you throughout different seasons of your life. Family members, friends, teachers, neighbors, mentors, parents of friends, even strangers, coworkers, people who maybe just crossed your path for a moment. We're connected by a lot more threads than we realize. If you're feeling creative, you could gather leaves and pine cones, feathers, acorns, stones, photographs of mushrooms, anything that you want to create a seasonal nature display. You could certainly pick up some commercial mushroom tea, like reishi, while setting an intention for healing, rest, or balance. And again, you would purchase that. I truly don't want anyone to get hurt because I talked about mushrooms. And they probably won't, but you can't say it enough. Be so super careful. If you have an altar or a sacred space, consider adding a mushroom. You can have an illustration, a carving, a photograph. You can buy little stones that are carved into mushrooms that are so cute. Lots of ways to do it. You could also put a little dish of dried mushrooms on your altar. Nothing wrong with that. A gratitude ritual inspired by mycelium. Just sit quietly for a few minutes and think about all of your hidden support systems. Think about all of those who encouraged you, were a part of your path along the way, the opportunities that came at the right time, the moments that carried you through something difficult, the kindness that was shown you that helped you to get to the next step or give you the confidence you needed to move on. Just sitting with that network and just sending your gratitude to it is a powerful exercise in itself. So I hope that the next time you see a mushroom, it will give you an opportunity to just think for a minute about the incredible network that that mushroom came from and the incredible network that you came from and some of the other magic around mushrooms. Kelly brings us today her bitch scopes for July 6th through the 12th. It's just an overview. You can find the rest of them over on her Patreon. But she had some interesting things to say about what is afoot currently. I provided you with a field guide to spiritual mushrooms. I just looked out for mushrooms in North America, since otherwise, most of you guys are here in North America. You wouldn't find them otherwise. So we talked about the fly agaric, psilocybin, magic mushrooms. Uh, I can't read that. I have to, hold on. Somebody should have worn their glasses, apparently. Oh, the blue meanie, the spectacular rustgill, the lion's mane, the reishi, the Ionotus obliquus, or the chaga mushroom. You probably heard it as a chaga. Morel, of course. Oyster mushrooms. Who hasn't seen oyster mushrooms growing on a tree at some point in your life? I'm sure you have. And then snow fungus, which is another mushroom that's very interesting. So those are some that grow. There's warnings on all of them, though, about whether or not they are safe. But again, be careful. And like I said, with psychoactive mushrooms, don't get too dependent on those to tap into your intuition. It's not great for you. Okay, Christy's energy exercise is the calm mind. Lots of crime over at True Crime Squad per normal. That never changes. And then lots of meditations over at Planet Meditation. And that's what I've got for Luminous this week. So hopefully you found some gems in there, something you can relate to. But I love the conversation about mushrooms. I think it is so fascinating. You also have to think about the fact that if we know they're poisonous, we know that somehow, right? Either from observing animals eating them and perishing, but animals are a lot better than we are at not eating things that will kill them. But it's also possible that people have perished from eating these things. That's most likely, and we learned from watching what happened to other people. Uh, yeah. Oh, Jane, you saw some oysters? That's awesome. There's a lot of different oyster mushrooms. There's blue, there's pink, there's the white ones. I think there's a yellow. Oyster mushrooms are pretty fascinating. You can buy mushroom kits that are basically just a block of usually sawdust that have mushroom spores in them that are active. That usually all you have to do, I mean, there's instructions on the package, obviously, but usually it's just something like spritzing them down with a spray bottle every so often and watching for them to start fruiting and then taking the bag off. And you can grow a lot of different mushrooms that way. We've done that. Scott's done that many times for fun. He's grown a lot of mushrooms actually over the years. It's pretty interesting. Lillian said there was moths last week and mushrooms this week. What's next week? Miracles? It's got to be another M. You know what it's going to be, and it's not an M. It's sacred alcohol. I almost did it today, but I was so into mushrooms right now, I decided to do that. But next week, we're going to talk about all of the sacred ways or spiritual ways that alcohol has been used over the centuries. There's some really interesting lore there as well. So, people didn't always just drink to have fun or to think they were a good dancer. Well, we've done it. We have talked down to the end of the show. So, I want to remind you that I am a professional psychic advisor over at 12listen.com. You can find me over there every day. All you got to do is go to 12listen.com, number one, number two, listen.com, and look for me, Katie Weaver, and I'll do what I can to help you. I do a lot of energy work over there, animal communication, psychic readings, mediumship. I'm here to help you in any way that I can. So give me a call if you're struggling. One thing I find with some of you guys is by the time you call me, you're in so much energetic distress or, something's so hard in your life. And I'm happy to help you anytime in any stage, but you don't have to wait until things are horrible to give me a call. If you feel like stuff's going in a direction you don't like, call me. Let's talk about it. Let's see what we can do and what you need to know. But don't suffer in silence, you guys. I am here. I'm more than happy to help you. Alrighties. Well, until next week with a very fascinating topic, this has been the Katie Weaver Show here on 12 Radio, where we're changing the way you listen to the world. Thanks for being here.